January 6th, a day that will live in infamy for many reasons. Yes, there was unjustified violence and trespassing that occurred at the Capitol that day, but it also marks the beginning of a new era of justice in the United States, the kind that criminalizes peaceful protest, unacceptable beliefs, and dissenting speech. With us today is Steve Baker, a journalist for The Blaze, who was there on January 6th, documenting the events that unfolded that day, and who has since put together pieces of a really disturbing puzzle that puts the potential corruption of the DOJ, the FBI, and the Capitol Police in the spotlight. On March 1st, Steve was arraigned before a federal magistrate accused of crimes allegedly stemming from events at the U.S. Capitol on January 6th, 2021. And today, Steve is joining us to detail the humiliating ritual that he was forced to go through during that arraignment, the questions that he is still working to answer regarding January 6th, and also the effect that this has all had on his life, on his mind, and his spirit. You will be left with many questions yourself, as well as many answers about what really happened that day. But I think most of all, you will be impacted positively by Steve's courage. This episode is brought to you by our friends at Good Ranchers. Go to goodranchers.com. Use code Allie at checkout. That's goodranchers.com, code Allie. Steve, thanks so much for taking the time to join us. You've been doing a lot of interviews the past few days. Wow. I've been keeping up with all of it, and I appreciate you and the courage and the clarity that you have in talking about your story. So let's back up. Let's go to, first of all, why did you decide to become a full-time journalist? That's what I want to know.
Let's just call it a late in life reinvention, or
Yeah.
maybe I'm just a late bloomer. I don't know. Writing has always been an interest of mine. My editors may not think so. They think I'm a good storyteller, but I write differently than what's expected for a major publication.
Yeah.
But I cut my teeth. Even as a kid, my favorite thing was British literature. I just was consumed with that and science fiction, and so I've experimented myself telling stories like that over the years.
Yeah.
I've always been a full-time musician or in the music business in some manner or the other, either as a artist management, concert promotions, et cetera, or as a performing musician. And so that has always had the captain's seat in my life. And the other was always a hobby. Then the internet came along. See, I was around when the internet came along. You weren't. But it started out, we had this new format to exercise that other talents or gifts. Those of us who like to write. So there's a lot of amateur writers that were stretching out with the advent of Prodigy, CompuServe, AOL. All of that became MySpace. I actually started my first blog using the MySpace platform and my first political blog. So I actually had my personal page, I had my band page, I had my personal private musician performance page on MySpace, and I finally launched my political page, and I established that identity and started building a following there. Then, of course, it was, by 2008 or something like that, pretty much everybody was leaving MySpace and all going to Facebook. And Facebook had their own blog platform called Notes back then.
Mm-hmm.
So I had the same thing, personal pages. I had like 3 or 4 different bands. I had all my band pages, and then I had my my political page, and where I would do commentary, analysis, things of that nature. And as time went on, it began to grow, began to take root, and it went from 1,600 to 16,000, and then bigger than that, and then you start adding on the other social media sites as well. So by the time COVID came around and the government took my actual job away from me, because over those years my hobby had become basically my side hustle, the writing part of it. But music was still my primary source of income. and I had several streams of income during that time, all dependent upon live performance.
Right.
The bands that I was managing, my own bands. I had 3 bands of my own. All of that was taken away. And so I was suddenly put in a position where after 2 weeks to flatten the curve became 2 months, that I went, all right, I'm going to buy all the podcast stuff, so I did. And I bought, all the gear. And then
You're just a creative person, always looking, you need an outlet, which I can relate to.
Yeah. And there certainly was that. And I actually made the decision. I announced to the tens of thousands of blog followers that I had that I was moving this to the captain's seat of my life, and I was going to move my career to the co-pilot seat, because I had no idea how long this was going to be. 2 weeks, 2 months, or 2 years to flatten the curve, or if we were ever going to get it back again, if we would ever normalize or just descend into some dystopian nightmare, at the end of this.
Right.
I didn't know.
Right.
But I had a lot to say about it. And so myself and another friend of mine, actually a colleague, very close friend of 30 years, and a very great writer who's written for some big names, both as ghostwriter and doing other things. He and I decided to actually work on a COVID book together. And he was going to do more of the political side of that. I was going to cover the hard, nuts and bolts investigative side of that, get into the the nitty gritty, and we began working on that in earnest. And one of the things that I decided to do during this time was, because I have I have this investigative instinct that I got from my dad, who was a private investigator.
Okay.
That's a whole other long story.
Yeah.
And I used to work for him when I wasn't traveling with bands. I would
Wow.
work with him in his operation. And so I began to travel all over the country during the lockdowns. I actually traveled to 28 states during the lockdowns to meet with, I was doing meetups with my blog followers, but obviously I was asking questions. I wanted to know what their experiences were. I wanted to know how many people in their own life had either been dramatically affected by COVID-19, if they had family members or people that they were close to that died. And so I'm collecting data for our story and for our book at the time. And one of those trips had been an extended 2 or 3 month trip, and I got home just in time for New Year's on what would be New Year's of 2021. All right. So we've been locked down for 10 months effectively at this point. And President Trump had announced that there was something going to be happening, something wild happening on January 6th, and that he would be speaking. And so my close friend who I was working on the COVID book with, who also lives in Raleigh, we decided to go up and cover the event for whatever it was, not knowing what it would become.
So you really had no idea.
No idea
what it was.
No, and I announced to my blog followers. I said I was anticipating, actually, because there had been this notion. I think it was first floated by Sidney Powell, one of Trump's lawyers, that they were going to unleash the Kraken.
Yeah.
Remember that?
Yeah.
And the Kraken never came.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm thinking, okay, if it's going to come, it better come on January 6th.
Yeah.
If at all, ever.
Yeah.
And I'm not a Trump supporter. Never was. And so this is, I'm just an observer.
You just wanted to know.
Yeah. I mean, I'm politically libertarian. In 2016, I voted for Gary Johnson, Libertarian Party. In 2020, I did vote for Trump, but I voted for him to block what I knew was coming from the Biden administration.
Right.
I was not going to waste my vote on that. And I decided, and I announced again on my blog, that I was going to January 6th to see what was going to happen.
What's the Kraken?
So I took my camera, my tripod, my man-on-the-street microphone, and all I intended to do was document whatever was said from the stage, if there was something significant at all, and then to get people's impressions on the side of the street, on the street corners and sidewalks as they were there. I had no idea how many people were going to be there. In my gut, I had a feeling, because it was on a Wednesday, And it was in winter in D.C. It was cold, 25-mile-an-hour wind. I'm thinking 30, 35,000 people. That's what I thought would be there.
Right.
I had no idea that hundreds of thousands of people on a work day would show up. And in fact, standing in the Washington Monument lawn, as I did 360 camera views of this overwhelming number. I've never been in a sea of so many people in my life.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember asking my friend, I said, do you think this many people are here on a work day, a Wednesday in the winter, because they've been displaced because of COVID? Or do you think that there's something else going on? Because it seems hard to believe, you know, depending upon where they came from in the country, it might take, this is a 2-day commitment. You know, for myself, it was a 2-day commitment. I just live 4.5 hours away from D.C. And if you've had to fly across the country, it's almost a 3-day commitment to do that. And he said, you know, he's looking around, he said, I don't know, it may be a combination of all that, but it turned out it was a combination of the frustration that people were feeling. And I'm not talking about just about the disputed election fraud claims and things of that nature, but people they've had their lives disrupted. And this was, again, not something I anticipated, the powder keg that was. Mm-hmm. And that's what, you know, started thing. Actually, the powder keg of the people's frustration didn't start this. There were provocateurs there to launch this. And then when you can use mob mentality and you can fire them up, then you can create a scenario that they did eventually create, you know, later in the day. Yeah. But we can get into that as much as you want to.
Yeah, I want to play some of your footage from when you recorded in the Capitol. This is shot 1. Okay, so this is footage. You can see you just filming there. And as this was happening, as you were going from the rally where President Trump made his comments and you noticed that people were going to the Capitol, people were going in, what was going through your mind at the time?
At that moment right there?
Yeah.
Whew. Well, there's a lot of things that led up to that moment that were surprising and unexpected. Not only the violence and the blood, the attacks on law enforcement that I saw, coming from the other side, the illegal use of what they call less than lethal weapons to try and disperse the crowd. They weren't just using them illegally, they were using them immorally, I mean, against their training. And so I'm documenting all of this before the crowd ever broke through up to the upper terrace and then eventually breached that door, none of which I saw. I was down documenting what was happening on the lower west terrace. And then when hundreds of people started moving through this open door, I had no idea how that door was open or how it was breached. It's just, it was open. Yeah. Cops were now standing down. They were not inhibiting the flow of people going in whatsoever. I made the decision to document what was happening, to follow the story where the story went, as I had done up to that point in the day, except this time the story went inside the building. And
you had a sense at this time that, wow, this is phenomenal. Like, not in a good way, but something is happening.
Yes. Yeah. And really and truly, you don't, I say, I'm not a riot chaser. I mean, there were young, 20-something-year-old riot-chasing journalists that do this all over the country, and they especially got good at it during the BLM riots of 2020. I don't do that. That's not my thing, and I don't ever want to do that again. But I shouldn't say but. As a result of not having that experience, I was really in two frames of mind. Get as much of this on film as you can get, because this is important, and stay safe. I had to avoid police launching pepper spray into the crowd with these big tanks of it, the high, like super soakers,
Right.
And then the flashbang grenades that were being launched into the crowd, the tear gas grenades that were being launched into the crowd. I got hit by one of them. It landed about 3 feet to my right, detonated, exploded, and the shrapnel from it hit me in the side of my knee, and I had a bruise there for 6 months. But there were people that got hit in the head by those things. People that were shot in the face by rubber bullets, penetrated. It was horrible use, but these cops were scared too.
Yeah.
They didn't know. And in fact, one of the stories that I wrote about the Capitol Police is I tried to get the audience to understand from their perspective what they were seeing. Can you imagine? You showed up as though it was just another day at work, and no intel has been passed down to you from Capitol Police leadership. That's the interesting part of that story, is why were these frontline officers not informed about what was coming when they knew what was coming?
Right.
And so all of a sudden, these unprepared frontline officers, they're not looking at me standing there with a camera or the other cameraman or even the persons that were striking at them with sticks or flagpoles or whatever. They're looking over my shoulder and seeing tens of thousands of people advancing in their direction.
And they have no idea if these people are armed.
They have no idea. And they literally, to a man or a woman, didn't know if they were going home that day.
Right.
They had no idea.
Yeah.
Many of those officers who I've interviewed, both unnamed and whistleblowing sources that we've brought, in to help us develop our stories here at the Blaze, they called their wives and said, "Please tell my kids I love them.
Yeah.
I don't know if I'm coming home."
Yeah.
But when you get up to the door itself, what was I thinking? Again, by then there's no violence. Okay, it's all calmed down, and the police are standing off to the side. It's just this long, thick line of people going in the door.
So the violence that you saw was outside the door.
Correct.
And that was police trying to do everything they could to keep people from coming in. And then did it seem like the police just decided, all right, we're not going to be able to stop all these people from coming in, so I guess we're just going to let them, and people were just kind of trudging forward into the Capitol?
Well, by our investigations, we now know exactly what happened because we have access to the Capitol Police radio comms, and we know that just right at 2 o'clock, give or take a couple of minutes, there was an actual pullback order. And they were afraid at that time that the building itself was going to be breached, so they issued a pullback, unfortunately, because of the crowd noise, the chanting, the singing, the explosions, all the things that were going on. A large number of those Capitol Police officers never heard those pullbacks, but the ones up in the upper terrace did, so they pulled back, and that's why that line basically was easily breached at that point, and then these people could get to the door and start the process of busting out windows and jumping through the windows, coming around and unlocking that first door, what they call the Northwest Senate wing door. And then once that door was breached and people were coming through the windows and that door, hundreds of people started flowing throughout the Capitol and opening doors all through the Capitol. Right. And they facilitated the breach. The cops did not facilitate the breach, but they did do their best to de-escalate. We've seen pictures and photos and videos of them holding doors open. I can tell you authoritatively, because I've had access to all this video, cops never opened those doors for the protesters. Protesters went through those first breaches, spread out through the building, opened 6 other doors, and then sometimes we would see cops holding the door open, and even sometimes we can hear them on audio saying, "I don't agree with this, but you guys, please behave yourself," as people are filing in.
Yeah.
It was for their own safety, basically, that they de-escalated that, rather than continuing the violent attempt to prevent people from coming in.
Yeah.
But that's a complicated scenario. But then once inside, I'm not witnessing any violence. Was there violence that did happen inside? Yes. I never saw the violence happen inside. I was never in that area where that was taking place. I did witness some property damage. I actually documented on my own camera when they took the Speaker of the House sign down, Nancy Pelosi. They actually, I can see them not using a pole or a flagpole or something and knocking it off of the arched entryway into her hallway where her offices are. I capture the sign falling, and then they start breaking the sign into splinters and handing it out, the pieces as souvenirs. So I did see some of that, and as I said, I caught it on my own camera. The moment you asked me about in that video that you just showed, that was taken in the crypt, and this was just hundreds of people piling in there, and it was elbow to elbow, and every single passageway, hallway, room that I got into, my first endeavor was to get up and above the crowd. So what you saw there was me getting up on a bench so I could document what was happening, not participating, not chanting, not singing. They sang the song, the national anthem. They chanted "Whose House? Our House," "Stop the Steal," "USA, USA." Those were the three big chants of the day. And I would always get up above it. Never joined in with any of that. And then you saw at the very end there, I'm actually leaning against the wall. This was right outside of the House of Representatives chamber. People were piling in, trying to get in the door. They were trying to bust that door open to get inside. And by the way, there were still Congress members in there at the time that they were doing this that had not been evacuated yet. And so I didn't know that, but I based on what I had already seen, what I'd already witnessed, I felt like I needed to write some notes down. I needed to get some texts out to people. And so I stopped, actually set my backpack and tripod and all that on the floor, and leaned up against that wall for, I think it was 4.5, 5 minutes and something, and took a bunch of notes, sent a couple of texts out. And then while I was doing that, Capitol Police released tear gas at that crowd there. And if you saw that video that we released yesterday morning, if you watch the whole thing, you can see suddenly that crowd almost disappears in that cloud of gas. And when the gas starts to disperse a little bit, you can see me going, "Where'd everybody go?"
Yeah.
I was caught so off guard. And another thing that I learned, because I'm not a riot chasing reporter, is that when you are caught up in an event like that, especially if you're not prepared for it, your mind and your memory is Swiss cheese afterwards. The things that I have seen from my own video, and then the things that I've seen once me and the Blaze team were able to go to the Capitol and harvest this Capitol CCTV video of me, I'm like, I don't even remember it.
Right.
And there's places that I went, I don't even remember being there.
All right, pausing for our first sponsor for the day. That's Adele Natural Cosmetics. You guys know I love Adele Natural Cosmetics. I use their makeup often, and I use their skincare every single day. I use their essential cleanser, their moisturizer, their moisturizing spray. It's just made a really big difference in my skin, the texture of my skin. And as I am getting older, and the ripe old age of 32 now, I have to care about how my skin is aging, and I just want to do everything that I can to take care of my skin as well as possible. And Adele Natural Cosmetics helps me do that. They're toxin free, they're all natural. Everything is from God's medicine cabinet, so I don't have to worry about anything potentially harmful going on my skin when I use my skincare from Adele Natural Cosmetics. If you go to their site, AdeleNaturalCosmetics.com, you can use my code Allie for 25% off your first time purchase. AdeleNaturalCosmetics.com, code Allie. I remember watching it as it was happening, or at least shortly after it was happening on January 6, 2021, and just being spontaneously brought to tears because the things that I saw, I mean, it did at the very least look barbaric and chaotic. And yes, some violence, some people obviously trying to shove their way into the Capitol, the attempts by police to mitigate as much of the craziness as they possibly could. And it kind of just was a moment as a bystander of thinking, what in the world is happening to this country? Obviously, knowing, as you described it, as a powder keg, there had been a lot of tension, a lot of questions, a lot of disappointment, and a lot of distrust from the public. And so it's not like it was all that surprising that something like that would happen, but to see it in front of your face, at least from the vantage point that I had, I mean, I thought, wow, this is the end of something. I don't know what, or the beginning of something, but does feel like a new stage. Now, I'm not sure if that was the correct assessment, but it has certainly created a new era of American so-called justice. And that has also been appalling to me over the past couple of years. And you are included in that. Now you are in legal trouble for the reporting that you have done. So tell us a little bit about that.
Well, the view from 30,000 feet is this, because this is a complicated journey, and it's been over 2.5 years. It's obviously been over 3 years since January 6th, but it was in July of 2021, just 6 months later, that I got my first phone call from the FBI. Now, I had been expecting it at any time, because not only were they arresting people that went in, but they were interviewing journalists. So when I got the first call, I'm not necessarily 100% sure that this is an investigation into me, or if they want my observations, or if they want me to turn over my videos. I'm not 100%. But once my attorney started negotiating with the FBI as far as the dates, and we began to kind of get a sense that they were actually looking at me for some reason. Then my interview actually took place in October of 21 with 2 FBI agents and my attorney. And then it was a month later, the week before Thanksgiving of 21, my attorney got an email from an assistant U.S. attorney who said to him that his client would be charged within the week, meaning me. And it actually included a felony charge at the time.
Wow.
The felony charge was laughable, but nevertheless scary.
Yeah.
They were going to charge me with interstate racketeering.
Wow.
Now, nobody else in January 6th, there's been over 1,300 arrests so far in January 6 cases. Nobody's been charged with interstate racketeering. The only way that they could prove that or assert that was they were going to make an allegation that somehow for it to be racketeering, I had to have foreknowledge that an illegal event was going to take place across state lines, and that I went there with the intent of profiting from the illegal event.
Okay.
The profit was from the licensing of my videos.
Okay.
Because HBO, New York Times, I actually had an agent, so my videos were licensed.
Yeah.
And I did make some money off of that, as is the norm with journalists.
Right.
So that was a big stretch.
They said that you had to have known that something illegal was taking place. You did know that something was taking place.
Yes.
But they claim that you knew that it was illegal, that you crossed state lines to make money off of this illegal activity that you knew was going to happen.
That was the only way they could make that.
Was your attorney shocked?
About that charge?
Yes.
We were laughing about it. They also, now the scene you showed is very interesting because it has something to do with that first threat of prosecution was in the crypt room when I stood on a bench and stood up above the crowd. Who knows or who knew? I certainly didn't know that, but in the Code of Federal Regulations, just the very act of standing on a piece of furniture in a federal facility is a crime, a misdemeanor. It's property damage. Even though you don't damage the property, even though there's no damage whatsoever, the act itself is a misdemeanor offense. And they were going to charge me with that as well for that very scene that you just showed right there. We were able to back them down. We did a media offensive back in the week of Thanksgiving. And for whatever reason, we have no idea, we didn't hear from them again for 20 months. They just went
So
away.
a media offensive in that you shared your charges on social media and you made a big deal of
Yeah,
it.
we
And
issued a
everyone
press
was
release
like,
to about
"That's
200
ridiculous."
media organizations, newspapers, television, podcasts, radio, blah. It was full on. I was doing dozens of interviews again then about the threat, and then for whatever reason, they decided I was too much of a pain in the butt or something, and somebody took my file. That's the only thing. That's only because we don't know. I'm conjecturing right now. I don't know what happened behind those closed doors or at the conference tables at DOJ when they were looking at my case. But we kind of feel like that they just said this guy's a real
So
pain.
at that time, they didn't charge you. They
No,
just
they
told
didn't.
you this is what we are going to charge you with, and then they didn't after you made a big deal of it.
The exact quote to my attorney was, "Your client is going to be charged within the week," and then they listed the charges.
Right.
And then we didn't hear from them for 20 months. So now we're into 2023, summer of 23, and I'm in negotiations with the Blaze because they know what stories I'm working on. And I've been in negotiations with our editor-in-chief here for about a month. And then suddenly I get a grand jury subpoena for my videos, which we had offered cooperatively, voluntarily to the FBI 20 months before. But they didn't take it then. So there's only two reasons. Either this was, well, first of all, it was an unnecessary grand jury if they just wanted to see my video, grand jury subpoena. But grand juries, unfortunately, are not seated for misdemeanor offenses. Grand juries only investigate and look at felony offenders. So this was rather ominous. And the fact that they came out of nowhere after 20 months of silence, I kind of felt like after 20 months they had decided, okay, we don't want to fight the fight of a First Amendment battle with a journalist. But it was very suspicious, the coincidental timing, that right when I was in negotiations with the Blaze to come on board as a correspondent, that suddenly I got a grand jury subpoena.
Yeah.
And that's what happened. And then again, through my attorney, we voluntarily or cooperatively, I should say, complied with the subpoena. We handed over all my video, and then we didn't hear from them for another 4 months. Then they popped up again in December, the week before Christmas, saying that I needed to self-surrender in Raleigh, North Carolina, where I live, the next week. Well, by now, I'm with Blaze, and the whole machine went into high gear. And within 24 hours, we backed them down again with the media offensive.
How did you do that? Oh, by
Just
the media offensive. Yeah.
Press, the publicity, all of the shows, both the Blaze TV shows and hosts, all the outside press that we did. Within by the close of business of the next day, they contacted me yet again and said, "Okay, well, we're not going to do this till after Christmas sometime." And then we didn't hear from them for 2 more months.
Yeah.
So the gap between not hearing from them was getting shorter and shorter. It was 20 months, and then it was 4 months, then it was 2 months until, as you know, about a week and a half ago, I got the notice that this was the big one, and it's time, and we want you to self-surrender. And then they took the nearly unprecedented action of, even though it was only, they apparently couldn't impress upon the grand jury whatever felony they were wanting, because they only came back with misdemeanors. So whatever felony the grand jury was looking at, the grand jury must have said, even a DC grand jury went, "No, don't think so."
Yeah.
So they came back and told my attorney that it would only be misdemeanors. But even though it's only misdemeanors, we want Mr. Baker to show up on Friday morning, March 1st, in, and I quote, T-shirt, shorts, and flip-flops.
Yeah. And that is for the purpose of humiliation. What do they say the reason is for that?
They didn't give a reason, but we knew what it was. First of all, it was obvious that it was to facilitate. I just assumed that they were going to put me in an orange jumpsuit. I'd be able to easier just slip the jumpsuit over the that. I had already anticipated that there would be shackles and leg chains because they have done that to other misdemeanor defendants in the J6 community. They've also done it to other independent journalists. That in full, orange prison jumpsuit and shackles, and then march them in front of the magistrate that way for their arraignment.
And this is literally for standing on a piece of furniture, texting for a few minutes.
Although they did not charge me for that.
Oh.
They actually didn't. I got the same 4 basic misdemeanors that all the low-level January 6th defendants get.
Okay.
The first one is what I call the glorified trespassing charge, entering and staying in a restricted building. The second 2 are actually redundant. They accuse you of abusive and loud speech inside of a restricted area and then inside the Capitol building. So they hit you with the same exact charge twice. And then the fourth one is the really absurd. It's called picketing and parading in a Capitol building. Obviously, I was not picketing or parading, which is why we rolled out this video yesterday to show that we had harvested from the Capitol CCTV to show that I wasn't wearing any Trump paraphernalia. I wasn't wearing any political speech at all on my clothes, hat, scarf, jacket, nothing. And I certainly didn't carry a flag, or I didn't chant. None of the things that charge applies to. But see, this is what the Department of Justice does. Is they specifically, purposefully, and this is not just January 6th. They do this in other cases as well outside of that realm, but they always overcharge, egregiously overcharge, for the purpose of scaring you into either a plea deal or a plea deal that accompanies you becoming a quote unquote cooperative witness against whoever you might have been there with.
Okay.
And so that's just modus operandi for the Department of Justice anyway. But with January 6th defendants, we've been able to watch the pattern as it develops, because we have had 3 years to watch this. And of course, because I've been covering many of these trials and many of these cases, and I've read hundreds of these charging documents, I pretty well knew what was coming my way. But what we did not, and for which I will never forgive them, and for which we will go after them with great guns legally. I have to say that. You have to clarify, when I say go after somebody with great guns nowadays. This notion that they punished me in the manner they did by the humiliation tactics, there was no doubt that they were, in fact, retaliating against me for the stories that we've developed and that I have been rolling out here since being at the Blaze, as well as things that I did before I was here. I've been I asked my attorney, why are they doing this to me? And he said, this is my lead attorney, and he was over 20 years a federal prosecutor himself. He was an assistant U.S. attorney. And I said, Bill, why are they doing this to me? He said, you know why. You've been poking them in the eyes for 3 years, and they're getting you back.
Yeah.
So rather than me getting just a simple order to appear on nonviolent misdemeanor charges, showing up in my suit and tie with my attorney in his suit and tie and sitting in the gallery of the magistrate's courtroom and waiting for my number to be called to go up and be arraigned for those 4 misdemeanor charges, they chose to have me surrender to an actual arrest by the FBI at their field office, at which time they did not put me in the orange jumpsuit. They took my shoelaces, they took my tie, they took my belt and my jacket away from me. I was able to wear my shirt and my pants. And then
you didn't show up in the uniform that they wanted you to.
I did not.
The flip-flops and the shirt and the shorts. It was kind of your own way of protesting for your own dignity.
That's it. I said, I'm not giving up my dignity for this.
Yeah.
And so I dressed as I deemed appropriate, and with 100% support from all 6 of my attorneys in so doing. 2 of my attorneys accompanied me. Blaze accompanied me. My editor-in-chief here, camera crew, reporters, and others from outside of the Blaze were there to cover. And After I surrendered my belt, my shoelaces, my tie, and my jacket, I walked over. I shook hands with the 2 FBI agents. They took me inside, did the search, pat down, fingerprinted me, put handcuffs behind me, with my hands behind my back in the most uncomfortable position possible. They could have cuffed me in the front. They didn't have to cuff me at all, but I suppose once you're there and you're in the situation, that's what they have to do. And then they marched me out for my perp walk in front of the cameras and took me to a car where they transported me then to the courthouse, the federal courthouse, and handed me over to the U.S. Marshals. And it was the U.S. Marshals who then put me in leg chains, belly chains with my wrists cuffed to my belly and my shackles on my ankles, and then put me in a cage with a meth dealer.
Wow.
And so where I sat for a couple of hours before my hearing began, and then they did the most humiliating thing they could have done, is in front of my colleagues and friends that were there and my attorneys, they marched me in with felony defendants, one in the jumpsuit, drug dealers, and marched me in with them in leg chains.
Wow. Then what happened from there?
I was first up. So went up and went through the legal proceeding. It's all pretty template stuff at that point. There was no motion from the government to detain me. They could have. They've done it before. So there was no request from the federal government to have me sit out either the weekend or just be permanently detained pre-trial. So once all of that was established, they took me back out again, and they took me back to my cage. And then it got interesting because by now the U.S. Marshals knew I wasn't supposed to be there. And the U.S. Marshal that took me back upstairs, he goes, let me get you a cell by yourself. And he did. So he took me over a little further away, got me a private cell by myself so I didn't have to be holed up with drug dealers again.
Right.
And then I had to wait for a few minutes for some paperwork to come up from the court. Then he took me back into the processing room where they did electronic fingerprints, the mug shots, all of that. And I will not use the language he used on your show, but he looked at the paperwork, and then he looked at me and he said, "This is BS." Of course, he said the full word. And I said, "Yeah, it kind of is." He says, "And you want to know what is even bigger BS?" I said, "What's that?" He said, "The fact that Trump is not paying for all of you guys' legal fees."
Right.
He said, he said, "You cannot believe how many of you guys I've had to process through this thing."
Mm-hmm.
And so they finished up that. I had to go back and sit in the cell for a few more minutes. And then finally, they had all the paperwork they needed to release me, and they let me go, took the chains off, took me downstairs. And it was a world. It's been a whirlwind since then.
Yeah.
I walked straight across the street from the courthouse right onto a live TV show, and it's been that way ever since.
Yeah. All right, next sponsor for the day is Good Ranchers. Did you know that mRNA vaccines are approved and in use for pigs in the U.S.? So that means your bacon, your pork could potentially have mRNA in them, and you wouldn't know it. That's why you need to be getting all of your meat from Good Ranchers. They are mRNA free. You can get your amazing bacon from Good Ranchers like we do. And then, of course, they're better than organic chicken, their seafood, their beef, all from American farms and ranches. So you can support this American industry in addition to supporting a company owned by a family that loves the Lord. They love America like you and I do. It's just a win all around. Plus, it makes your life so much easier getting that meat sent to your front door on a monthly basis. Right now, they've got an awesome deal going on. They are giving you, with any subscription that you sign up for, a free 10-pound Easter ham. This is a $119 deal that you will be getting for free when you subscribe. Plus, you can get $25 off any box when you use my code Allie. So go to goodranchers.com, code Allie. So your lawyer noted the disparate treatment that you have gotten versus other journalists. There was a freelance journalist who published a lengthy story about January 6th just a few days after it happened, and he was nominated for a Pulitzer.
Right.
I don't think you have been quite yet. So why is that specifically? You mentioned you've been poking them in the eye for 3 years. What exactly does that mean?
I got really, well, obviously, after being at the event on January 6th, I'm now curious about all things related. I'm not devoted to it in the manner that I have been in recent months, or especially for the last year and a half. I wasn't even as devoted to it even after my initial threat of being charged. What happened is that I was still working on my, COVID book with my co-author, which, by the way, January 6th kicked the chair out from under that project. But as my curiosity about the cases, and I began to see what the Justice Department was doing, and doing to other people things in a manner that they had never done before in the history of American jurisprudence, like, for instance, the FBI, in their 100-plus year history, never investigated misdemeanor cases. Never. It's not what they do. Kyle Seraphin wrote a great article, op-ed for The Blaze, and in which he said, when I got hired by the FBI and became an agent, he said, we don't deal with the small fish, we go after the whales. And he said, suddenly, January 6th, we're not only being tasked to go after nonviolent misdemeanor grandmothers or young couples or whoever that took a selfie inside the Capitol and were in there for 10 minutes, but they're requiring us now to SWAT them at 6:30 in the morning with guns up on nonviolent misdemeanor. It's something we've never done in the history of this agency. Everything changed January 6th. Not only that, but more egregiously, in the grand scheme of things, they're pulling these agents off of real crimes. They're specifically FBI whistleblower Steve Friend taken off of child trafficking cases to go arrest grandmothers that took a selfie in the Capitol and maybe chanted the 3 horror words of all, USA, USA, USA. And he said, I'm not doing that. Not only is this against everything that we're supposed to be, we're violating our own handbook in doing so. And he became a whistleblower. And of course, not only him, but many others. And so you then go to the Department of Justice itself, which is the overriding agency above the FBI, and they're the ones sending down these instructions. And of course, the Department of Justice they answer to the Biden administration. So this is coming from the top, the way they are treating. And as we've seen before in so many other instances, it doesn't matter if they're targeting Catholic groups. It doesn't matter if they're targeting abortion clinic protesters. It doesn't matter if they're targeting. Remember Merrick Garland famously issuing a threat against the parents. They're protesting at school board meetings. Literally calling them terrorists, domestic terrorists. Well, so this is what they have done. They've created an entire new class. So not only is your speech at a school board meeting make you a domestic terrorist, but now it feels like there's this new class of misdemeanor terrorism related to January 6th. I mean, there is no such thing. There is no such law, but that's the way they're treating us. That's the way they talk about us. There are even judges who have let it slip in the courtroom in January 6 cases who have called them terrorists in their pretrial hearings.
Right. Two of the stories that you're asserting kind of embarrassed, or the Blaze has asserted, embarrassed the DOJ, had to do with Oath Keepers and their perjury, and then also the DNC pipe bomb.
Yeah.
So the consequences that you are detailing, the humiliation that you had to endure, has come after these two stories where you are kind of poking holes in the official DOJ narrative of how things have gone. And your lawyer is asserting, yeah, they just didn't like that. And so they are retaliating for your journalism. It doesn't really have to do with what you did on January 6th, which we all saw was just reporting. It has to do on the content of what you are reporting, right?
That's exactly what it is. Obviously, I have been following as much of the news and commentary about my case as I can. And one of the things that I've been most interested in is how many like legal affairs podcasts and writers are specifically talking about how almost blatantly obvious this is retaliation in their viewpoint because of the stories that I've been working on. Because see, taken it on its face, if we're talking about me having a scent, as an investigator of potential perjury of a couple of federal officers in January 6 trials that resulted in the conviction and imprisonment of several people, not only were we able to prove that conclusively by virtue of my access to the Capitol CCTV viewing room, that's just that's just what we see on top. You see, these officers didn't choose to perjure themselves on their own. These two officers didn't get together in a back hallway somewhere at the Capitol and make up a story. We have the evidence of how the story was put together and who put them up to it, which will be coming. And they know it's coming. And our sources inside the DOJ said all the way back as early as February of last year that they were terrified of what I was working on because they know this goes to the heart of them. These officers, these federal officers, one a special agent on the dignitary protection detail for Nancy Pelosi, then the Speaker of the House. You think he decided to risk his entire career by going in front of a courtroom and a jury in D.C. and telling a story that was not only false, but one that could not have happened because what he claimed to have witnessed in the Capitol, he couldn't have seen. He was in another building. And we found him on Capitol TV at that time.
And this is Lazarus?
Special Agent David Lazarus.
Yes.
So when you find things like that, well, it rattles the cage of the people who put them up to these false testimonies. Then you get to the pipe bomb,
right?
And you start showing the actual cameras that would be used to document and aid in the investigation are being purposefully redirected away from the scene. We've now found 3 of them. I only revealed 2 in our video reveal. We've now found a third. Actually, Joe Hanneman from the Epic Times, he called me up all excited. He goes, "Hey, I found a third camera turned away." I said, "You're kidding me." So we now have 3 cameras turned away from this event. Allie, that's cover-up.
In case people don't know, 2 pipe bombs were said to have been discovered outside the RNC and DNC headquarters in D.C. on January 6, 2021. So just in case people didn't know what you meant by pipe bomb.
Yes, and we found these cameras that were supposed to be locked on a crime scene. Somebody in the command center 6 blocks away at the command center of the Capitol Police were ordering those cameras turned off of that scene. And this was a scene where, when it began, Vice President-elect Kamala Harris was in the building only feet away. Her motorcade drove 15 feet from the bomb itself. And that raises so many other questions that we've asked in our video series. And so when we start asking questions, it's because we intend to find those answers. And again, the people who know the answers don't want to be exposed.
It raises a lot of questions about how this all originated and how it's been perpetuated over the past few years and what is the ultimate goal. I mean, I can tell you, again, just as a bystander, the trickle-down effect for people in my audience is Well, you should never go to a protest.
Yeah.
You should never go to a rally because you don't know what it's going to turn into. And you might think that you're an innocent participant exercising your First Amendment rights. Well, I'm never going to talk about the things the DOJ don't want me to talk about. I mean, it's just a way of intimidating you. I mean, I know that that is at least one effect, one chilling effect to all of this, that most people at the end of the day are not willing to sacrifice their safety, their family, their livelihood to write about something, to poke the DOJ bare, or to even protest. I'm not defending the people who pushed their way into the Capitol, but it does send a message to the regular conservative American. You can be conservative. Don't speak up about it, and don't ask questions that we don't want you to ask.
Well, you're very perceptive because this is the ultimate effect, and it was the ultimate purpose of what happened on January 6th was that chilling effect, to throw a wet blanket over freedom of speech, over the First Amendment, to frighten all Americans away from using their right to, bring their redress of grievances to the Capitol, but not just the Capitol. We mentioned earlier, school board meetings, abortion clinics, anywhere else. They're creating an entire class of domestic terrorists, and the overriding evidence of this, and I've reported on this, and I've even gotten MSM colleagues, we'll call them,
Mainstream
media colleagues, to admit to it in private to me. They'll never write about it because they won't be allowed to by their editorial staff, to say that when these people are convicted and then they're sentenced, if there was speech involved at all, that's what causes their sentencing to be more severe. And people that are living in D.C., these legal affairs journalists that cover every one of these trials. I mean, they work literally out of the courthouse. I don't work out of the courthouse in D.C. I have other things to do. But those who are there every day and cover all these trials, they have all said, yeah, you're right about that.
Yeah. Wow.
And so if you were just a grandmother and you walked into the rotunda at the Capitol and took a selfie and you were in there for 10 minutes and you didn't chant or you didn't sing or you didn't wave a flag, then you came out, you got arrested, maybe you got swatted, maybe you don't. But the point being is that when you negotiate your plea deal, you get your 2 years probation, a $2,000 fine, 100 hours of community service, and then you get to go try to rebuild your life.
Right.
Because you lost your job, you got kicked out of your church, whatever clubs you were in, they've disassociated from you. You're a pariah in your neighborhood. You no longer can pass anybody on the street when you're walking your dog and say hi anymore. That's what they've turned you into. You are literally a domestic terrorist as portrayed by your local hometown newspaper and television stations for taking a selfie in the rotunda, okay? But if you're the same person and you walked into the rotunda and you took a couple selfies and you chanted and you sang and you waved your flag, or maybe even worse, when you got back home, you did a Facebook Live and go, ha ha ha, jokingly, I stormed the Capitol yesterday. Oops, I hope you didn't say that.
Yeah.
Because then you get, instead of 2 years probation, you get 2 months, 6 months, 8 months, 10 months in prison.
Wow. All right, next sponsor for the day is Covenant Eyes. I know that it can be really uncomfortable talking about this subject, and that is the subject of pornography. But unfortunately, it's ubiquitous. It's everywhere. And if your kids have any access to technology at all, I'm talking young kids or even teenagers, you want to do everything that you possibly can to help them combat the predation of porn. And Covenant Eyes allows you To do that, it is a software that you can download on all of your devices, has accountability features so that either you can hold yourself accountable with someone else that allows for this accountability partner feature, or you can help protect the members of your family from seeing the kinds of content that we know isn't good for their mind or heart. This is a huge problem in marriages, in young people's lives. It hurts relationships. It hurts your ability to love other people well, to see other people as image bearers of God, because you start viewing them as objects, and that affects everything. I mean, porn is such a scourge on American society. And so Covenant Eyes has been battling porn addiction through their software for years. And so do what you can. Protect yourself, protect your family. Go to covenanteyes.com/Allie. You can get 30 days of free protection for you and your family. Go to covenanteyes.com/Allie. I think what a lot of people see, and yet it doesn't make it any more comfortable realizing the double standard. It actually just makes it even more chilling when you see that, okay, the DOJ is going to go after one kind of speech, one kind of so-called rioting, and not another. It's not just an attack on the First Amendment. It's not just an attack on free speech. That would be scary enough.
Yeah.
It's scary that it's some kind of speech. If you want to express your anger at the injustice of systemic racism and literally stage an insurrection in some ways and burn down buildings and say that you are a terrorist, basically, is what a lot of these left-wing extremist groups do, then probably nothing is going to happen to you, at least on a federal level, in many of these cases. I think the scary part is that it's some free speech, a very certain kind of category of free speech that is not allowed. That to me is the even more intimidating aspect of this.
It's far worse. And we have multiple examples of that as well, even among journalists. The first person arrested out of the panhandle of Florida, his name was is J.D. Rivera. And he's a professional videographer, photojournalist, was under contract by a mainstream television station out of Mobile, right across the bay from Pensacola, Mobile, Alabama. He traveled up. He carried all of his expensive gear, his big, bulky, expensive camera gear with him, all of that. He went through the exact same broken window that the freelance journalist for the New Yorker you mentioned a while ago, Luke Mogelson, went through. They basically paralleled each other through the Capitol, doing their jobs. Luke was doing his job. JD was doing his job. JD never chanted, never sang, never waved a flag, none of the above. Behaved himself professionally as a journalist while he was in the building. He exited, drove home. A couple of days later, he's swatted for the 4 basic misdemeanors by 25 agents with guns drawn on him, his wife, his children, and they had visiting family relatives.
Now, what did he report that made him so dangerous to them?
He hadn't even had a chance. This was in the very, very early days.
They were afraid of what he might have said.
Might have said, might have seen, might have caught, whatever. But this was what his crime was. It wasn't even that, because he hadn't even had a chance to report anything yet. His crime is that he had been an activist since the early days of the first Trump campaign in Latinos for Trump movement. So they did not arrest him, swat him, charge him for his journalism. They denied him the right to even present the fact that he was a journalist, and he was there for legitimate journalistic purposes. Instead, they arrested him for who he was, not even for his speech on the day, but for his activism in politics prior, because what they deemed is that this showed his intent was actually not to be there as a journalist, but to be there as part of the mob. And that's the big quote in all these charging documents. He was there to participate with the mob.
And that's probably what it was for you too, at least in the beginning, right? Because this was before you even worked for The Blaze, before they knew what you would be reporting on. I mean, I know that you said that you weren't a Trump supporter, but you had voted for Trump. You were a libertarian, which they also don't like. You were writing about COVID, which they also don't like. So don't you think that was probably part of the motivation for you?
My second article about January 6th was published on February 24th of 2021, 6 weeks after the big event. And the title of that article was Who Was Up the Chain on January 6th? And in that article, I already had an idea of who put this thing together, and I had already started putting the pieces of the puzzle together. I was also the first journalist to reveal that Army Special Forces had been embedded in the crowd. For what reasons, I don't know. And it was 10 months after that before Newsweek actually ran an article that said that they Army commandos with shoot-to-kill orders were embedded in the crowd. So I beat Newsweek to the punch by 10 months. So I think that they probably already knew that I was a danger to their narrative early on.
Mm-hmm. And that you had been putting things together. What do you have coming down the pipeline on this? I mean, I know you can't say everything, but just as far as the questions that people have, what are you seeking to answer?
Well, as it relates specifically to January 6th,
yes,
to a man and to a woman, the law enforcement officers that were thrown to the wolves that day, I actually called them in a series I did called Capitol Police Were Sacrificial Lambs. I believe that the frontline, low-level, lower than command level officers were intended to be sacrificed that day, and they were even, and that the Capitol Police leadership and those who were calling the shots on that day were willing to, because they expected the MAGA people to show up fully armed with guns and all of that. I think they expected a shootout that day, and I expect that they were fully willing to sacrifice a number of Capitol Police officers that day. I also, as I said, to a man, to a woman on the front line, they all believe that they were set up. We can prove that. We know that they were. We know that they were set up. We're going to continue telling that story and showing how that's happened. And as we continue through this process, we're going to name names. We've had an incredible amount of assistance from Congress. Yeah, does it feel like they're slow rolling us on January 6th, not having hearings? They should be at least duplicating what the original January 6th Select Committee was doing, that was put together by Pelosi, that put on a Hollywood-produced primetime show trial, essentially, is all that was. Yeah, they should be. The GOP should be doing that, but there's some problems there. The GOP are not united on this.
Right.
More telling, though, is we're now learning how powerful the Capitol Police are. And this is a major part of where we're going. But when you think about it, it doesn't take but maybe just a slight little bit of prompting, and you'll see what I'm talking about. The Capitol Police are effectively the personal bodyguards of Congress. As a result, they know where all the bodies are buried. They know who's buried the bodies. They know who's sleeping with who. They know who's sleeping with not who they're supposed to be sleeping with. And all the other dirty laundry that's on Capitol Hill. And so when the GOP gained control of the House in January of 23, and Speaker McCarthy came out and said, we're releasing all the January 6th video. And then 2 weeks later, no, we're not. And then he sent his lieutenants like MTG and other ones out to say, oh, but there's reasons why. Otherwise, we're going to get some innocent people jacked up in the J6 trial system if we do that. And all of a sudden, they pulled back. And then all of a sudden, Tucker went out. He did his couple of days of reveal after having access to Capitol CCTV. By the way, Tucker's producers called me to ask me what they need to be looking at.
Yeah.
Then, all of a sudden, he goes away. I mean, he really goes away. He gets fired from Fox. But suddenly, with all of this unprecedented access he had, he only did 2 nights and then never mentioned it again. And then, jump forward again, Mike Johnson is given the speakership. He says, I'm going to release all the video. And then all of a sudden, for weeks, nothing is released. There was another batch released the other day. The problem is, as we know it, is the power of Capitol Police leadership. The Capitol Police Board, basically, I mean, there's no other way to say it. You release that, we release what we know.
Right. That's what you're saying is going on. Both Republicans and Democrats have a lot of skeletons in their closet, and they don't want those doors to be opened by Capitol Police.
And I don't believe for a moment, because I've spent time with each of them. I've spent time with Speaker Johnson. I've spent time with Barry Loudermilk, whose subcommittee has control, actual direct oversight over the access to the Capitol Police. They've helped us tremendously. They've not held anything back from me yet, except some documents. I've gotten all the video that I've asked for, both with the permission of the Speaker and Loudermilk. We've worked with some other congressmen. We're working with more. There's still some internal documents that are in the files of the United States Capitol Police that they know that if it ends up in my hands, that it's volatile. In fact, one of the documents that we've seen, but we can't write about it until we have it. You know what I mean? I can't, because if I can't prove it to the American public, I can't write about it. But senior congressional aide who's had his eyes on it told me, quote unquote, it's nuclear.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah. So we continue to, and these are not classified documents, but Capitol Police is not subject to Freedom of Information Act requests.
Right.
They're exempt by Congress, wonder why, from FOIA requests. And so we can't just, as a news agency, FOIA that information.
Right.
It's being blocked at the highest level.
Okay, last sponsor for the day is Jace Medical. We talk a lot on this show about being prepared, not paranoid. And this is one way that you can be prepared come what may. We know that we've had supply chain issues. We've even had some medicine rationing in the past with certain medications. And we just don't know what's going to happen, especially in an election year. And you want to be safe rather than sorry when it comes to the medications that you and your family rely on. So through Jace Medical and their confidential telemedicine process, you can get a year-long stash of common antibiotics that you might need, and also the daily prescriptions that you and your family rely on, a year-long stash. Should something happen and for whatever reason you can't go through the normal means of going through the pharmacy, you might need to dig into that year stash that you have. So go ahead, go through jacemedical.com, use code Allie, you'll get a discount, get those prescriptions, get those antibiotics. Hopefully you'll never need them, but if you do, you'll have them. Go to jacemedical.com, code Allie. How have you dealt with all of this personally, emotionally, spiritually? I'm sure you couldn't have anticipated being in this position 5 years ago.
No.
And so how have you worked this out in your own mind and heart?
I fully believed that I was going to die on stage from an aneurysm from playing my trumpet.
Yeah.
Too late in life, and after my my arteries and my veins had gotten weak.
Yeah.
And the pressure it takes to play a trumpet. That's what I've done for over 50 years of my life.
Yeah.
Over 40 years of that professionally. I'm a singer. My favorite thing that I've ever done as a singer was I had a David Bowie tribute act that was shut down because of COVID. That's why in these videos I have a lot longer hair.
Yeah.
In these Capitol CCTV, I was using the COVID lockdown time to actually grow my hair out to another look of Bowie's. And so, anyway, going down the list emotionally, everything that I've been through in the last 4 years, if you can't see that as divine providence, you have a sealed or seared soul, conscience, spirit. That doesn't mean I haven't wrestled against it. That doesn't mean that for over 2 years I haven't prayed, Lord, let this cup pass from me. But I have also said that if I have to be poured out as a drink offering on the altar of liberty,
So be it.
I'll do it. And I don't want to.
Mm-hmm. It's not where you saw your life going.
No, but my children are proud of me. They believe in me. I can't remember who I told the other day, but I'll repeat it here. There's only two people on this planet because of me. It's my son and my daughter. And as long as they're proud of me, I can go the next step.
Amen. I understand that. And even though most of us are not in your position and can't even imagine what it has been like for you, that we can relate to. That we can relate to.
Yeah.
How can my audience specifically be praying for you?
I think it should be self-evident. We need wisdom in our next step in terms of how we're going to plan our defense strategy with my attorneys. That's to be determined. The first piece of the puzzle that we have to gain access to is who our judge is going to be. With as many judges in the district court there in D.C., and all the trials have to be there. They've not granted a change of venue in a single trial yet. So we may get a hanging judge, or we may get a reasonable judge. But even if, regardless of the case, of what type of judge we get, a radical leftist, activist judge who we know how severely he or she might treat the J6 defendants. We know that even with the more common sense and reasonable judges, you know what you're up against in D.C. It's a 99.75% conviction rate on January 6 trials so far. Only 2 acquittals have happened out of over 1,300 cases so far. And in both of those cases, it was a bench trial. Got a reasonable judge in a bench trial. No defendant has yet got out completely unscathed by a jury. They were either convicted on all counts or convicted on some counts, and others, acquitted on maybe lesser charges or a worse charge or this or that and other thing. There's been some hung jury moments, but not on all charges. No one's gotten out unscathed on a jury yet. So we don't know what our strategy is going to be until we start putting this together. And of course, it's a long ways before there will be a trial, because there will be all kinds of motions. I mean, we're certainly going to file intense and vigorous motions to dismiss over selective prosecution and things of that nature. And they know all this is coming. I'm not saying anything. I'm not giving anything away, and I'm not going to get chastised by my attorneys for talking like this at the moment. But there's a lot to. So to answer your question, we have to pray for wisdom. At the end of the day, I need the wisdom, because whatever my 6 attorneys bring to me as suggestions, it's going to be my decision about which way to go. And so that's the most important thing.
And just for continued courage, I'm thankful for your courage. We often say that courage is contagious. Courage begets courage. And so not everyone will find themselves in your exact position, but your courage is an example to people that you can do hard things. I think probably what they wanted you to do was to say, oh gosh, I'm getting in trouble. I'm going to stop talking about this. And you could have done that. You could have said, I think I'm going to go back to music. I think I'm going to go do something easier. And I really don't want to be poking this bear anymore, because this bear is huge and it's really scary. But you decided, that was a decision. You decided to forge ahead. It's not just that all of this is happening to you. You've decided to wage war. And that takes bravery. And I'm thankful for that. However this ends up, and we will be praying so much for your success and for your protection and the protection of all of these people who have been caught up in all of this, but and for true justice to prevail. Yeah. So I just want to thank you, because it means a lot to me.
Thank you. I'm doing it for one reason and one reason only. It's because I believe in the cause of liberty. I believe in our Constitution. I believe in our Bill of Rights. And I want that country for my children and their children. And I'm in a unique position. I'm single, have been for 17 years. My children are grown. The government weaponized me against them when they took my job away. This is their fault. And Lord, give me the wisdom, give me the knowledge, and whatever talents and experience you've given me accumulated in my life, use them as you see fit. That's the prayer.
Amen. Well, thank you so much. Thanks for taking the time to come on.
Thank you.